Imagine a day where children are guided and nurtured in a way that honors their unique humanness. A day where, instead of being expected to change in order to fit in, children can be met right where they're at. Welcome to Where They're Planted, a podcast for parents and care providers of unique children. Caring for a child with a developmental, emotional, or behavior challenge, a neurodiverse brain, or difficult early life experiences can be confusing and exhausting. On this podcast, we'll help your child flourish and strengthen their roots by helping you not only understand them, but also gain the skills to help them bloom where they're planted. We'll use brain science, nervous system tools, collaborative strategy sessions, and a deep understanding of the developmental process to create a fertile environment around your child in order to nurture their growth. I am your host, Jen Bluske, an occupational therapist with over 25 years of experience and a parent coach. My most closely held title, however, is that of a single mom of 2 thriving adopted kids, so I have walked this walk. I am truly excited to share, teach, and dive into these important topics on each episode. Welcome back to Where They're Planted. I'm Jen Bluske, occupational therapist, parent coach, and most importantly, parent to 2 children. Today, we're diving into the art of setting boundaries with our kids. Not necessarily as barriers to separate us or to disconnect us, but more so as a bridge that helps connect our relationship with our child. In this episode, I hope to explore, first of all, what a boundary is, and then how boundaries are just so vital for maintaining order, nurturing safety, respect in the home. When we set these boundaries with intentions and empathy, you can actually strengthen the bond with your child. So we're going to take a minute to reframe how we think about boundaries and sort of maybe move them out of that restrictive rule or that rigidity into something that creates opportunity in our relationship. So we are going to rethink, reshape, and reinforce what boundaries look like for you and in your family. I wanted to take a minute before I get started today that if this is a topic that is of interest to you, this is one of the topics that we discuss at length in our one-on-one parent coaching that we offer at Thriving Parents Collective. And if it's something that you're interested in digging into more deeply, feel free to check out the link in the show notes. All right, so let's start by defining what a boundary is. I think that, for many of us who were maybe raised in sort of a power over or more traditionally parent knows best family when we were children, I feel like we might have to really consider what a boundary is. So the definition of a boundary is something that I am going to do if you cross a certain line or show a certain behavior in my presence. So a boundary is not something I'm going to make you do. And so when we're thinking about parenting, that's really important. It's so important because I think as parents, if we were raised in sort of a iron fist, you will do as I say situation, and we're really looking to parent through connection, boundaries, when they're done well, is not using fear. Right? I can't make anybody, maybe like a 2-year-old that I can pick up and move, do kind of anything in the world. And I think that the way we, can make people do that is through fear and shame. And I'm presuming that in your parenting, that's not what you're looking for with your child, right? We're looking for connection. We're looking for our children to eventually set their own boundaries for themselves, right? A boundary of, if I go to bed too late, I'm going to feel miserable in the morning. So my boundary for myself is once 10 o'clock comes, I will be putting my phone down, right? That's an internal boundary we might set. Or I don't feel good when I'm around this person, and so I'm going to choose to limit how much I'm around them. That's an internal boundary. And so when we're thinking about these boundaries as parents, it's really something that we're going to do if there's some sort of line crossed. And so boundaries are so important in parenting because by setting boundaries and by modeling boundaries, and we're going to talk a little bit about modeling those boundaries as well, because that's just as important as setting them, we're helping our children find their own internal compass of their own boundaries. And so there's the obvious boundaries in parenting. We don't hurt, right? We don't hurt other people. Or if you hurt me, I'm going to respond in some way. And we're going to talk through like what that response is. Because again, we can't make kids necessarily do something else, but our job as parents is to keep everybody safe. There might be boundaries of we don't harm property, right? Right. There's these sort of, gold standard boundaries that I think most of us can agree on are important. Again, our goal as parents is to help our children learn that like there are these like laws in society that we kind of have to follow, right? There's a lot of pieces when I really talk to parents about setting boundaries that can be negotiable in a family unit. Do you have to wake up in the morning and change your clothes? I don't know. Do you need to sit and eat? I don't know. That might be specific by family. Is it a boundary that you clean up all of your toys after you play? Right? Again, a lot of you might be like, yeah, it sure is. But in some family units, maybe it's not. So there's these flexible ways of thinking about many of the boundaries that we set. And that's where I think it can get so complicated as parents of like, where do we set them? Which ones do we set? And then how do we set them? And are we being really clear with our kids about those expectations so that they know they can expect the same thing every time? Or, I know as a parent myself, I could be pretty flexible around, when things are picked up or when, in what way things are picked up. But when I'm having a stressful day and my system wants visual organization, I might quickly set you need to clean everything up after yourself boundary when just yesterday I didn't. And how confusing that can be for kids, right? It really breaks connection when the children can't predict where that boundary is going to lie. So let's talk about connection within boundaries. But it's our job as parents, at least initially, to be the ones setting boundaries, right? We are hoping as children developmentally grow that they're going to start setting some of their own boundaries, maybe even with us, right? So up into teenage years, they start setting boundaries back. And so this is why this is so important to have this connection around them. It is our job to, maybe set a boundary around, you know what, kiddo, we are going to not play at this park. We're going to be at this park because I'm noticing it's really hard for you to stay safe on this piece of equipment or by this road. It's our job to do that. One thing I really like to tell parents when I'm talking about boundaries is it is our job to set the boundary. And it is the child's job to have their feelings about it. So that's another thing that pulls us away from connection is, we think as parents that, you may not have, electronics is a big one. You may not have electronics tonight because you didn't do your homework. Reasonable boundary in your family, that might be something you set. So I won't be able to give you your phone. I won't be able to give you your phone until I've seen that you did your math worksheet. The child is going to have some feelings about that. And it is also our job in connected parenting to honor and support the feelings that they're having around our boundary. So this can sometimes feel a little messy. It can feel a little uncomfortable in our body, right? Because our child, if we, in the example of we can't give you your phone until your math worksheet is done, our child might be feeling angry, right? They might be saying how unfair it is. They might be having a little bit of a meltdown about the electronics. And when we're looking at really supporting connection within a boundary, and when we're really looking at supporting internal understanding of a boundary, our job is to hold the boundary while maintaining connection and truly seeing their experience. And their experience is appropriate. They're going to feel frustrated and angry that they can't have their phone. Where I think we get into trouble and where disconnection happens is when we sort of presume or expect that developmentally the child is going to thank us for the boundary, right? Or be lacking emotion around the boundary, or not have some sort of response around the boundary, right? That they're just going to soldier on and do as we say. What that's setting our kids up for is disconnection from their own internal compass. It's also setting them up from disconnection of the struggle to really communicate well when something isn't feeling, the sensation, the feeling good. We hope that our kids are able to verbalize, I'm feeling mad, I'm feeling frustrated, I'm feeling angry in a regulated way, and then hopefully be able to make a shift and do the math worksheet so that they can have their phone. So how do we do this? What are the steps we do? One step that we like to think about is once we have set the boundary, we are going to shift to active and reflective listening. We're going to actively listen to their experience. We're going to have empathy for their experience. That does not mean that we step in and fix it for them. I just did an episode last time on failure. We can honor, but that doesn't mean we step in and change it. And as a parent whom, you might be tired, you might have had a long day yourself. You might be uncertain about the boundary that you're setting. Like, ooh, is this the right one? It's really easy to get wishy-washy in it and be like, oh, well, actually here, you can have the phone for 5 minutes. What we're doing for our kids is helping them learn that if they have a big, giant emotion, something is going to stop in and sort of like damper it down. And that's not the healthy way, right? That's not the regulated way to learn about emotions. So we're going to actively listen. Yeah, you're really frustrated. I get it. Is there anything I can do to help this frustration? Can I help you start your math worksheet? Right? Yeah, I know you really want your phone. The phone is a no. I can give you your phone when the math worksheet's done. But hey, what can I do to help you? How can we work together here? Right? Sometimes in those moments, our kids actually are able to come up with some really fabulous strategies and supports for themselves and or some really fabulous negotiations. And to be honest, again, negotiations aren't necessarily all bad. A negotiation is potentially a child being able to express a need to get a need met in order to be able to meet the boundary. This happens a lot with teenagers, right? I reference my teenagers a lot, but curfew is one, right? Curfew is midnight. If you're not able to honor curfew, then I need to step in and take some of the privileges, AKA the car, away because my job is to make sure you stay safe. Sometimes the teenagers are able to come back and say, you know what? Here's the challenge with midnight or whatever it is, 11. The challenge is by the time I get there, it's this time. And then I only have 12 minutes and then the other kids are doing something. Like I'm really struggling with this because it's not working with my need. And my need is to have social engagement with my friends. Well, now we have an opening. That doesn't mean I'm shifting, but we have an opening to like figure out how to hit the boundary in a way that works for their need and for the safety boundary that I have set. So that takes a lot of practice, but we want our kids to be able to come back and be like, actually, I just really need help getting started. That's why I'm like not doing it. So that active listening and that empathetic understanding is really, really important to help foster that skill when a boundary is being set. Having the time and the space within the boundary that you're setting to see them, right? We set a boundary sometimes and we walk away. And then the child is really feeling stuck because they can't meet the boundary. They maybe don't have the skills on board yet, right? This happens with our little ones all the time. Don't hit your brother, SWAT. Don't hit your brother, SWAT. If you hit your brother, you're going to be on timeout, SWAT. The boundary is we keep everybody safe. But I wonder if maybe they don't have the skills for it. We might need to connect in a little bit more to teach the skill of what else to do when you're feeling the frustration and your brother's in your space. And again, continuing conversation around the boundary, especially with our little bit older kids, our like 7, 8, 9, all the way up, is really, really, really important in order to be able, again, to turn on that own internal compass, get our needs met within the rules of what we hope for our kids, within the rules of society, within the laws. We hope our kids are able to manage that as they grow into adulthood. So, how do we do this? I know that one challenge that I see with a lot of parents, and one that I experienced myself, is in the moment, it felt really hard to figure out where my edge was, right? I knew something wasn't right. I didn't like how they talked to me. I knew that, I had asked them to do something and they didn't follow through on it. I was frustrated, right? I was having an emotional reaction. I was frustrated. There needed to be some sort of boundary set. But what is the boundary? Is it you didn't do the dishes and so you need to do the dishes or else? Well, or else what? You didn't do the dishes or else you're going to lose your screens for a week. Is the boundary matched to A, is it a thing we're going to do or is it something we're threatening them? B, is it matched to the boundary that was pushed or is it matched to our own frustration level? Right? And so I know for myself, I often used an out of this isn't working. I need a minute to think about it so that I could get really clear on what the boundary was. Usually the boundary was I'm not being heard. And it's important for the child to be able to honor a safety edge or a participation in the house edge that I'm giving them. In addition to that, before we set the boundary, we need to consider what we're going to do as parents if they are not able to meet it. Again, it's what we're able to do. Generally, what we need to do is support them at a different developmental level. Support them in a way that is less developmentally complex. So an example being, I'm noticing that you're not able to bring the dishes out of your room. It's a issue in our home because it creates bugs, okay? I'm seeing that that's just too tricky. If I'm seeing dishes in your room, then I need to make sure that the dishes don't go to your room, right? It's on me. Usually these boundaries are a lot of work for us, to be really honest. Or when you try to go to your room to eat food, I'm going to give you one reminder to see if that helps, right? I'm going to developmentally move it back in the trajectory. We wouldn't let a 3-year-old eat in their room, right? We'll let teenagers eat in their room sometimes in some households. So I'm going to back it up a little bit. Well, then we aren't going to have food in our room. And I'm going to have to go into your room and look through it to make sure that there's no food. Developmentally, we often don't do that with teenagers, right? They like their space. They like their privacy. But I need to probably go in and look now because we're having an issue. So see how I'm putting that on me a little bit? They do have an outcome, right? Now they've got somebody watching them and they've got, they can't go eat in their room and the things like that, but it's mine. So I would take a lot of time and I would write down the boundary, usually on my phone in a notes app or on a piece of paper, so that I stayed clear when the emotional rush came that children are going to have when you set a boundary. Okay, so that's one strategy that you can use when you're really trying to think about how do I do this? Consistency, right? I usually encourage parents to really think through which boundaries they're going to set, because then we have to be consistent about them. So what are the most important things in your family? Usually it's safety, and safety, right? Keep everybody safe, keep our home safe, and keep yourself safe. From there, we can sometimes let natural consequences take it away, step in and help. So some of the challenges you might see as you're starting to play with what a boundary means. First of all, for most of us, it's what is a boundary? I know in my parent coaching work, it's interesting because in the program we use for parent coaching at Thriving Parents Collective, we don't start teaching boundaries until 3/4 of the way through the work. It's week 9 of 12. The reason we don't start working on this work until that late in this learning is because in order to truly set a boundary, we have to have connected communication on board. We need to have regulation on board for ourselves because, man, it's hard to set a boundary and hear the emotionality come out of kids, right? We have to have some emotional awareness because we're really supporting those emotions. We have to understand our own patterns and what happens during distress for us, because by setting a boundary, we're creating distress, right? If we don't set any boundaries, there's often no distress, And so in order to really set these boundaries, I find, in my parent coaching work that we really have to have a lot of skills on board, including knowing what a boundary even is. I had to unravel that for myself as a parent, and I had to unravel that for most parents I work with and really get really clear on what we actually are asking of our children. So some of the common challenges that I see, go over those a little bit, is right, the pushback, the natural pushback you're going to get. And this is why, like, you got to be really clear that this is a boundary you want to set, because you're going to get pushback, likely, because it's a boundary, right? It's something that they're crossing. They have to shift their behavior in some way, and it's uncomfortable, and we might need to add skills. And so be ready for the pushback. I think about when I set boundaries as a parent, right? Unless there's a big safety issue, right? Where I have to be like, no, not right now. I'm going to be really thoughtful about when. I'm going to do it when I'm resourced. I'm going to do it when I'm calm with my child. This happens often where one of my kids crosses a boundary, and I'm going to be like, we are going to talk about it probably tomorrow because I need a minute, because I know everybody's safe in this moment. We're going to reiterate the importance of it, and we're going to offer choice. We're going to pull them into the solution. They may not really want to be part of the solution, and that's okay. But we're going to pull them into part of the solution. And we're going to be as flexible within the boundary as we can be. There are many, many, many ways to meet a boundary. And sometimes our kids give us enough nuggets of the way that they can truly meet the boundary that we are setting that feels authentic to them. And so in all cases, if we can come to that, that is my best case scenario. And so I encourage you with this little nugget of information around boundaries. Boundaries is just such a big topic. I mean, in my parent coaching work, we talk about this the whole way through, and then finally we really teach it. And that's when it finally clicks. But boundaries are such a big thing to unravel. Would love you guys to consider this week, whether you have a 2-year-old, right? Where we're working on the boundary of, I'm sorry, you can't have the candy bar in the store aisle. Or whether you have a 7, 8, 9-year-old where I need you to do your homework before your screens. Or whether you have a teenager where the boundary is, I need you to be home at curfew, right? They're all different developmentally, but to really be thoughtful and intentional about what the boundaries are for you and your family in this moment, and really focus on those. And then begin to explore the idea of a boundary is this something I'm going to do if you cross it. And I'm going to be able to see your emotionality about it. It's a both and. Explore with that. My last nugget for you is to consider practicing some boundary setting outside of your parenting as practice for in your parenting. I sometimes find that that's the first step for many of us. It's just like, how do we set a boundary for ourselves? Like, that didn't feel right. I'm going to leave now. Or, ooh, I'm going to say no because I'm feeling exhausted tonight. And just to practice it within our own bodies before we try to do it in the most challenging of ways, which is with our children, with the goal being of creating connection and understanding within the boundary. I think I'm going to leave it there for today. Thank you so much. Where They're Planted is a Lit Path Studios podcast and is produced by Jamie Gale and Jen Bluske. Music is by Gaston Reen and Pod 5. Thank you for loving your child right where they're planted.